Hello, welcome to Studio 2. This is an unscripted video going through this brochure here. You can't really make it out because it's in white text on a bright background, but it's the July-August 1985 Ford Cars brochure. So this one's going to be a bit longer than my previous brochure video. That was around 90 pages, the Rover 1992 one. This is, I believe, about 120, 130, and it covers all of the Ford models available at the time. So from the Fiesta all the way, like Escort, Orion, Sierra, Capri, Granada, Granada Scorpio. It won't cover the vans, it won't cover the Courier, the Transit, the P100. The P100 wasn't actually out yet. But yeah, it will cover all of the cars. So this video, as I said, is unscripted, but I do have notes next to me that just have dates of when cars were introduced, when they went out of production, that sort of thing. Because I noticed that the previous brochure video had a lot of hesitation and I was unsure quite a lot of the time with the dates that I was talking about. So I've decided to do some notes and avoid that happening this time. So we start with a very 1980s shot for the contents. There's nothing really of interest in the contents beyond just how it looks. So we start with the showcase pages. As with the Rover brochure, they usually put in a couple of pages at the start just to detail specific models that are either new or perhaps they aren't selling well, so they want to try and push them. It varies. So with this one, they're showing off the XR 4x4, which was the four-wheel drive version of the Performance Sierra at the time. The Performance Sierra below the Cosworth, I should add, because obviously the Cosworth was, the proper homologation up there, whereas the XR4 was bringing it down a notch, but still a fast car. And the XR 4x4 was fitted with the V6. I believe it was the same V6 as in the Capri, the 2.8 injection, but you could also get it with the 2-litre engine that says there. So, as you'd expect with the performance four-wheel drive car, they're talking about its on-road ability and, describing it as sure-footed, safe, as well as exciting. All the things you'd expect for a four-wheel drive performance car. And then we move on to Motorsport. Now, they're not talking about the RS200 because I believe at this time the RS200 was still in development. Even if it wasn't still in development, the project was top secret. So instead they detail a Group A, Group A Escort RS Turbo, which looks quite nice actually. I don't think I've ever seen footage of this particular car racing, but based on the 0, the blank number on the side, this might be just a demonstrator. And this is Formula Ford. Is it Formula Ford? I believe it is. So we start with the Fiesta, which, this is the year that the Fiesta goes out of production. So I guess it's good timing or bad timing. But at this point, this Fiesta was dated. It was very dated, in fact. This model had released in 1976, and it was facelifted in 1983. This is the facelift, but beyond just the front bumper and the boot lid, they were the same car pretty much, certainly from the outside. So they show design sketches here. I believe these were for the facelift, but for the purposes of sketches, they made it look a lot less like the car that it was based on. But you can tell that it is still the old Fiesta because of that window line. Curves upwards at the back. So you start with how Ford liked to describe their base models, which was the Popular, trying to bank off of the old Popular's name. The pre-Anglia economy car was called the Popular. And the Popular especially was really basic. I think the Popular Plus it may have added a radio that sort of thing. You know, tiny update. Other standard equipment on the popular bus include halogen headlights, a digital clock, and fingertip switches. So, not a great update. Not a great trim level, I mean. But they did the job as basic cars for learners. Then you had the Fiesta L, which was the sort of true base model in terms of the car you'd actually want. The Popular and Popular Plus were just too basic. This is probably the proper starting level. So I believe this is what like driving schools would have had, and companies that had hatchbacks as company cars, it's like fleet cars, would probably have had the Fiesta L as well. So it was probably one of the better selling models. Then you have the luxury one, the Fiesta Gear. Again, using the Gear name was quite common at this time. I think it started to come into practice about 10 years before the Gear name with Fords, but now it was being used across the range to just denote the top trim level. It had lost its coach builder association and was now just, you just see a Gear badging and, oh, that's an upmarket Ford. You don't think, oh, that's a coach built luxury car, which I suppose was what they were trying to get across, that these are the luxury models. But you can tell from how it looks that it's just a Fiesta with a bit more equipment. And then you had the famous one, the XR2, the infamous one, or I should say, rather than famous. The surprisingly not very powerful hot hatch. So this was about the same time as the 205 GTI, and the 205 GTI had about, I think, 105 horsepower, or I think 115 with the 1.9. I could be wrong on those. Whereas this had 95. It was slightly lighter because it was an older design, but it still wasn't. It wasn't really quick enough at the time, but it did look the part and it handled well. So it sold well up until the Mark III Fiesta came out in 1989. So yeah, this 1976 design would go on until 1989. And throughout that time, as you can see here, it was never offered as a 5-door, unlike the Metro, the Nova, the 205, its competitors. Although weirdly, for such an old car, its best year was in 1987, by which point it was 11 years old, which is rather strange, but they sold 150,000 of them, which, you know, car manufacturer would dream of those numbers in the UK nowadays. But back then it was, you know, that's what you got for an 11-year-old hatchback. So it details all of the equipment. I won't go through it because there's a lot of information. Then we have the bestseller. So the Escort was the best-selling car in the UK, I believe, up until the Focus came out in 1998. And it was just what people who in the UK who needed a car but didn't really care about it, this is just what they got, an Escort. Or even people who did care about cars, they'd get a performance Escort. It was just the car, a bit like the Volkswagen Golf is nowadays. Like, it will fulfill really any purpose you want. So yeah, they call it a family of cars rather than just a model because of all the different body styles you could get for it. So you could get a 3-door hatch, a 5-door hatch, a 3-door estate, a 5-door estate, or the saloon, although that was bad for the Orion. So this model of Escort, the Mark III, came out in 1980, and it would last until 1986, so the year after this brochure was published, when it will be facelifted to become the Mark IV, which really all the facelift did was just change the front bumper and the rear bumper, and some aspects of the interior. So it's the usual Ford facelift you see on the earlier Fiesta. So once again, you've got the popular. Also interesting that the second base model, what would be Popular Plus, is called the Saloon. Bearing in mind this car was not a saloon. That was what the Orion was for. So although it is styled like a saloon, it was a hatchback, so that's very odd. Also note the weird steering wheel that became very popular on base model cars in the 80s, just to give them weird out there steering wheels. Obviously pioneered by Citroën, but copied by other mates. And then you've got the Escort L, which, as I said, with the Fiesta was probably one of the better selling ones because it was the sort of livable base model rather than just all out cost saving. It was more about being refined as well as cheap. Although those wheels are awful. they look like they're off a truck. They look like they belong in a base model and it doesn't really fit with the rest of the car. Then you've got a step above the GL, so the Escort range had more trim levels than the Fiesta because it was a more expensive car at its top end, so they had more room to move. So the GL, again, it's just like the L but with a bit more equipment. And then the Gear, same story as the Fiesta, the luxury model in inverted commas. But it was somewhat luxurious, I guess, but it wasn't going to win over any BMW buyers, I'll put it that way. Also, I love this photo, like the framing. You would not get that on a modern brochure, with the parking beacons and just the car set up in this weird gradient surrounding. It looks very 80s, but good. Same with this shot of perhaps the most infamous car in this brochure, because I said the XR2 was infamous, but not as infamous as an XR3, or in this case the XR3i, the updated one with injection. This was where everyone knows about an XR3. Like, these were the car for yobs back in the day, like how Audi S3s are now and Golf Rs. But no, back then it was this, with its 105 horsepower 1.6. Now you struggle to get that sort of power out of a base model hatchback, but this is much lighter because it doesn't have lots of useless equipment. Also, lovely wheels. I always love the XR3 wheels. Then next you have the Cabrio, which was, I believe, the UK's best-selling Cabrio, but then the Escort was the UK's best-selling car, so it makes sense. Interesting that they've got this after the XR3, implying that it's a step up from it, when in terms of pricing it would have probably been similar. But visually it's a step down. You know, it's not as overtly sporty as the XR3, even if it does share the 4-hole wheels. And then you have the Estates, which are as you'd expect. They're just Escort Estates. Nothing too much there. There. We come on to the Laser, which was a widely used trim level. I believe it started out as a limited edition of Fords, but then it was so popular that they made it its own trim level. So you could get Escort lasers, Sierra lasers, Capri lasers were quite famous. I don't know if you could get Fiesta lasers. But yeah, certainly for all of their other normal models, the Granada didn't get it either. The laser was a common theme. And I believe it was just an L, but with a bit more equipment for the same price. And the option of different paint colours like this nice maroon here. Look, you can see there just how many, at the bottom, just how many models there were in the range at the time. There was a lot of them. Again, just information that I won't go through. Ooh, 4 pages of it this time. A Ford Orion. Just an Escort, but slightly longer. So this was for people who wanted a family car and liked the design of the Escort, but wanted a saloon boot. So more conservative buyers. And this wouldn't... Its main competitor would have been, at the time, the Rover 200. And to a lesser extent the Austin Montego. It wouldn't really have a proper competitor until 1986 with the release of the much more modern looking Vauxhall Wales. But yeah, at the time this was very popular. It still was very popular. It didn't release with the Escort. It released in 1983, 3 years later. I don't know why it took so long for it to release, because it clearly isn't that much different from the base car. Who knows? Buyers certainly didn't seem to mind. So apart from the rear end, the only difference is the front grille. It got a chrome surround, and a blacked out grille. That's it really. You know, all the trim levels are the same, except it's got, I don't think it has the base models. Yeah, it's got nothing below the L, because buyers who wanted a saloon car like this didn't want the base models of the Escort, because the base models of the Escort were mostly for driving schools and fleet cars, and they didn't buy Orions. That gear does look quite nice in that black. It does look like a mini Granada. Those wheel trims do look very modern for a car, you know, 1985. So, you know, they look like they're from the mid-90s. They got 4 pages for the Orion gear. They do. That's very odd. I think that's the only vehicle in this book, apart from maybe the Capri 2.8, to have 4 pages to itself. They were really trying to push it. Yeah, you can see there that it's got nowhere near the same number of trim levels as the Escort upon which it was based. That's why it has 4 pages. They're trying to advertise it at 2 different models, the gear and the gear with fuel injection. That's why. Now this is what probably the most 1980s looking brochure shot ever. Blue sun in the background and just the blue tint over everything, apart from the indicators. That's fantastically 80s. So the Sierra was another really well-selling, really good-selling Ford. After a bit of a rocky start, when buyers were preferring the old Cortina over the Sierra, the Cortina Crusader, I mean, the Sierra did pick up in terms of sales in 1983, but then in 84 and 85, which is when this brochure came out, the Vauxhall Cavalier actually beat it in sales. But after that, the Sierra just blew past it because it was much more modern than the Mark II Cavalier. And it actually, weirdly, for a 1982, a car that came out in 1982, it had its best year in 1989. So the Sierra sold 175,000 cars in 1989, by which point it was 7 years old. It was a 7-year-old design. Although ironically, even at that point, it still looked more modern than its competitors. The Mark II Cavalier especially looked very dated by then. And I think the Sierra was outselling it 3-1 by that point. So again, it forgoes a base model. Although weirdly, so they get rid of the popular name, but they keep the Sierra, they keep the saloon as a trim level, even though, like the Escort, this also isn't a saloon. Because a saloon Sierra, the Sapphire, wouldn't come out until 1987 with the facelift. So it's weird that they're using saloon as a trim level. And then you've got L, which has a very cheap looking pinstripe down the side, as does the GL. GL also, again, has a weird 2-spoke steering wheel. As I said, it was a trend at the time. The gear has the exact same pinstripe, and then the Estates. So this, oh look, the Estate also has that pinstripe. They clearly had a surplus of them. Now I've never been a huge fan of Sierra Estate. I think the back just looks way too generic. I don't mind that it looks a bit bulbous. You know, it's not like the US market Ford Taurus Estate where it's just a blob, but it's, I don't know, the rear window just looks too big. It's just not great proportion-wise at the back, but it's still overall a decent-looking car. I certainly prefer it to the 3-door Sierras, because I don't think the 3-door Sierras are very balanced. They don't look good. But I would take a Montego Estate over the Sierra Estate. So now we get on to the more performance models. So again, another incredibly 1980s brochure shot for the 2-litre IS. So they emphasised the fact it's got fuel injection, which at this point was still, it was becoming more common, but it still wasn't the norm for family cars to have fuel injection. And then you've got the XR 4x4, which was at the start. And again, this is just the XR4i, but with four-wheel drive. Quite nice looking car. Although I don't like the detailing around the lower bumper. It looks like there's too much stuff being done to it down there. That's odd. They have the XR 4x4, but they don't have the XR4 or XR4i. Did this replace it, maybe? Or did it come out first? I don't know. Now, the Capri, a very UK-centric model, because by this point, 1985, it was only sold in the UK. In 1984, left-hand drive Capris stopped being built, and it became a UK-only model, and maybe Ireland, but focused on the UK. And they also, I thought there was something on the brochure there, but it's just a little silver arrow. Yeah, they trimmed down the trims, I guess, pardon the pun, to just two. So you could either have the Capri Laser, again bringing back that laser name, or the Capri 2.8. Those were your only options. So at the start they emphasise the racing success of the Capri. You can see there the Group 5 Zaxby Capri in the touring cars. However, these are all 1977, 1979, 1980, 81, 81, 78, 80. Like the newest picture here was 4 years old at the time of this brochure's release. The Capri Mark III itself was from 1978. So it was 7 years old. Look at this. And it was based on the Capri Mark II, which was from 1974. So this was an 11-year-old car, but it reused some of the styling of the Capri 1, which was 1968. So this was ancient by this point, which explains why it was only sold in the UK. This is a really nice shot, although it does look like the Capri's been sort of badly edited on, because the ground just looks too black. It looks too dark. So what engine did the Capri Laser have, does it say? The Capri Laser had the 1.6, which was not the smallest engine you could get in a Capri. You could get a 1.3 in it that had 55 horsepower, and that, I've never seen one of those in person, but that just sounds utterly ridiculous, how little power that has for a car of this size. Because this 1.6 had 75 horsepower, there or thereabouts, and it 0 to 60 in 13 seconds, and it couldn't reach 100, top speed of 99. And, you know, that's incredibly slow for a coupe as it is, so the 1.3 must have been horrendous. It does say you can also get the 2 litre in this, which was better. You know, it was decent. It 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds. You know, that's decent enough, but not incredible. As was the 2.8 injection. Although it's got iconic status now, and I love how they look, they never had a huge amount of power for such a big engine. So it put out 160 horsepower, which isn't bad, but it's, you know, by this 1985, you've got, like, the BMW M5 is on its way, which isn't a good comparison, but it had a similar size engine to this. I think it had a 3 litre straight 6. And that had 280 horsepower. So this was not a true performance car anymore. It was a sports car still, but it wasn't a performance car. But yeah, it was still brilliant looking. Also, it was incredibly expensive compared to the 1.6 and 2 litre. So it says down here a 1.6 Capri was £6,500. 2 litre one was 6,800. A 2.8 was just under £10,000. So it was £3,500 more than a normal one. It was like 50% more. So it was an expensive car. Let's see, how much is the Sierra 4x4 to compare it with? Sierra XR 4x4, 11.5 grand. So you were almost paying like four-wheel drive Sierra money, which was more practical. I think it was faster. It was more stable because of the four-wheel drive. It was more modern. There was a reason this was only sold in the UK by this point. And now we come on to the only truly new car in this brochure, the Ford Granada, or in other markets it was called the Ford Scorpio, but here we retained the Granada name and only used Scorpio for the top trim levels. This lasted until 1994 when the blobby Scorpio came out, and we called it the Scorpio as well. That was the end of the Granada name. But at this point, it was still the Granada. So because this is the only new car in this brochure, like truly new for that year, they of course emphasise the design of it, the aerodynamics, more so than other cars. They've got 4 pages for it, I suppose because it was brand new. So here you've got a graphic of, you've got photos demonstrating the use of ABS, which was a very new technology at the time, or very new in road cars at least. It was only really luxury cars that had them, like the Mercedes S-Class, that sort of thing, the 7 Series. Demonstrating its use going around a tractor that pulls out and helping reaction times. So it starts with the GL, which was usually the mid-trim level for the other cars, but here it's the base model because it's a luxury car. See, a very, very nice interior. A lot of emphasis on the interior because obviously that's what you're buying a luxury car for most of the time. Another 2-spoke steering wheel, which is interesting. And then the gear, which again, that colour looks really nice. Another 2-page spread of the interior shot, including stuff of the sunroof there. And there we go, Granada Scorpio. So the top trim level, and what the car was called in other markets. Another 2-page spread interior shot with very comfortable looking seats. They look really nice. Also the same steering wheel as the lower spec ones, that 2-spoke one, which is odd because usually around this time, as the cars got more expensive within a range, they'd have a different steering wheel for each trim level, but I guess they didn't for this one. Just a weird detail I noticed. Okay, it continues. The Granada Scorpio has 6 pages to itself. A full width shot of the interior, with the incredibly orange wood veneer there, the 2-spoke steering wheel, the very nice looking instrument panel, the black, red and yellow, looks very nice. Doesn't look like the best layout though, like it looks very clustered either side of the instrument panel. I mean, you've just got this down here, but it looks luxurious, which is the point, I suppose. So these were expensive. So the top one, a Granada Scorpio, is 15.5 grand at the time. The base model was 8.5. So you were paying almost double for a top trim level compared to a base model Granada. When I say base model, it wasn't really, but the lowest trim, I should say. Then you've got, because rust and corrosion were still concerns at this point for new cars, mostly with Austin Rover and Alfa Romeo, but Ford as well. So 6-year corrosion assurance, service, lifetime guarantee, extra cover, all different buzzwords to try and reassure consumers that their car wasn't going to fall to pieces as soon as they turn the corner going out the dealership. Again, more things to reassure consumers, so parts and service, spare parts, exporting cars, credit, contracts, all that sort of thing. Then you've got, weirdly, a piece of art with the Sierra. I don't know why this isn't a photo, but it looks nice, but it's just weird that it's the only piece of art to demonstrate something. There was design sketches earlier on, but they weren't they were to be design sketches. Like that's why they were in here. This is the only piece of art that fulfills the role of a photo, showing the different towing accessories, because towing was and still is a big concern with cars, although less so now. And then all the different accessories that you could get. You usually have a separate accessories brochure for this, but I think that practice started in the late 80s. I know certainly by the early 90s they would have separate accessories brochures, but for now it's at the end of the normal one. So spoilers, sunroofs, ski racks, fog lights, ashtrays, roof racks, anything really. Ford branded motor oil. Back in the times when companies would sell their own branded consumables like that. And that, I wasn't expecting that is the final page. So on the back you can see the dealer stamp. So I just move the camera down. So this was from Gosport, this brochure. I bought this second hand, but yes, it's got dealer stamps, and it's my only brochure that I have that has dealer stamps, I think. Certainly none of my Austin Rover ones do, and I don't think my other Ford one does, and my Mini ones don't. Yeah, you've just got the dealer stamps, some sort of small print information saying stuff subject to change, and then the slogan, Ford cares about quality, which I don't know how long that slogan was in use, but it certainly isn't one that you hear very often, because it's quite a generic slogan. And there's that front shot of the Granada in front of a stately home, which was a very common brochure shot back then, to just picture your car, no matter what trim level it was in front of a big house with a nice garden, just to make it look more upmarket and posh, which of course they want to do for all their cars. So yes, that was the July-August 1985 Ford Cars brochure, and this has been a Studio 2 video. Thank you for watching.